Thank you to Stephen and to Stuart for their expertise on what is clearly an evolving piece of legislation. Welcome to the Q&A session brought to you by Salus in association with Procon Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire. So before we get into it, obviously we would be remiss not to mention the major ongoing incident in Nottingham at the moment, a place that many of you will obviously call home or be very familiar with. We hope that you're all well and safe, and you and yours are keeping safe. And our thoughts with everybody that's been affected by the terrible incident. So moving on to our panel session, we have a really great panel in today, some of your regular Salus favourites and also a couple of guest speakers as well. So if we could ask you if you'd like any questions submitting to the Q&A to be addressed by the panel, if you put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, click through to that, and that will give you the opportunity to put questions to our panel. So what we'll do is we'll start by some quick introductions. We'll go through the Salus guys first. So starting with Andrew.
Hi there, I'm Andrew Wignall. I'm the Corporate Business Director and the host for today from Salus.
And we'll go over to, you've already met him through the virtual pre-record. It's Stephen Cooper.
Hi, I'm Stephen Cooper and I'm one of the regional directors for Salus.
Another one of our regulars, it's Stuart Power.
Yeah, I'm Stuart Power, one of the directors at Salus. Who's
joining us from what looks like a very, very hot car at the moment.
I'm sweating. I can't get the aircon on.
And we've also got a first timer from Salus today, Colin.
Hi, my name's Colin Took. I'm Senior Fire Safety Consultant with Salus.
Excellent, and we've got a couple of guests in today as well. He joined us for the last version of this webinar. It's Pete.
Hi, I'm Pete Van Gelder. I'm a solicitor and partner at Gately, and I specialise in construction and engineering.
And finally, another first time before us, we've got Ed.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ed Reynolds. I'm a director at Wilmot Dixon in the Midlands. Been wrestling with this topic.
Excellent. Well, we'll go to you first, actually, Ed, because it's really interesting to get a view from someone that's a major contractor like yourselves. What is the feeling in the industry at large about the changes that are coming from the Building Safety Act?
I think, to be honest, most people aren't fearful of it. They would just like some clarity. I think people welcome a level playing field and a desire for enhanced building safety across the piece. But just, I think we're all grappling with the mechanics of it, and we're just, as always, with main contractors, you introduce something, but then we all want to know everything about it. So I think we can't get the detail quick enough. We've had some conversations with design partners and supply chain as well, with varying degrees of enlightenment across them. So yeah, there's definitely something about upskilling everybody in the environment where it is at the moment.
Yeah, as we mentioned earlier, it's kind of a bit of an evolving situation in that the legislation is there with a lot of questions being asked about it, which is why these webinars are quite a useful thing for people to tune into. We'll pop over to you now, Steve. Thank you for your presentation, really informative and hopefully answering a few of the questions that people have submitted already. But the Building Safety Regulator has already said, I read this the other day, that around 750 applications have started since it was launched. Their online register earlier in April. Are there going to be enough building control inspectors out there to meet demand? It seems that there's a whole load of legislation and a whole lot to wade through at the moment, and maybe not the building inspectors out there to deal with it.
There is, I think, as we identify, as a learning curve for everybody. And as Ed has said, it's not just the construction industry as a whole. They've got to learn. It's building control. They've got to learn how to cope with this new system. I think that there is a shortage. We need more people. There's no getting away from that. But as it stands, the industry is coping with the amount of buildings that are being constructed. That's not going to change. The amount of work that building control largely has to do won't change as a result of this regulator. It's just doing things in a slightly different way. So yes, it will be different, but I think that there is the resource there to be able to do it, or that could stand to be increased. And ultimately, we'll find a way to do it.
Excellent. So Stuart, obviously with regulatory changes like these, there's lots of dates flying around, lots of transitionary periods. What is the most significant and most pressing one at the moment, the most pressing deadline that people have got to look towards?
Well, at the moment, sort of the dates are a bit fluid, aren't they? So there's no real sort of deadline in terms of cut-offs at the moment. So it's and obviously everyone's working on the Part L deadline at the moment, which is obviously different to the fire safety side, which is making sure that they make a meaningful start before tomorrow, effectively, so they can use the benefits of the previous Part L. But like I said earlier, the thing about fire safety is things are changing rapidly, but there's nothing really totally cast in stone.
Yeah, I mean, we keep saying it's a very fluid situation, isn't it? So, as you say, the Part L deadline is probably primary in most people's minds at the moment. So we'll go over to Pete for this one. Obviously, these changes have been prompted by the Grenfell tragedy. Not to say that they weren't needed beforehand, but the Grenfell tragedy has put them in sharp focus. How badly were these changes needed across the industry, though?
I think what Grenfell did was showed people what the problems were. I think when you look at the steps that are being taken under the Building Safety Act, although they're not necessarily all brought into force yet, to try and regulate how building products are tested and what people say they can do and what they can actually do, I think it's high time that people were called to account. And if they're going to offer projects or products which are going to be safe, particularly in relation to cladding, but other building products, they need to actually do what they say in the tin and actually protect people and give that 60-minute fire protection or 90-minute fire protection that you need to evacuate people safely.
Yeah, and switching over to the fire regs, we've had a specific question that's come in, one for you, Colin, just in regards to evacuation. What category do high-rise student accommodation buildings fall under? Do they fall under residential? Do they fall under something else?
Student accommodation is a different category in total. It's the CII category, which means a different level of fire alarm system needs to be implemented. Level L1 system, depending on the size of the accommodation. Is it cluster flats? Is it single room accommodation? Then lots of different guidelines apply to those accommodation risks. It is different to normal residential flats. It's a lot more stringent in regards to standards and the quality of the systems within those buildings.
Yeah, it's a bit of a grey area, isn't it, Colin, really? Because like I say, a lot of student accommodations are built like flats, so they build them as cluster flats, which is sort of more akin to flats, but in reality they're probably better managed than flats. So it's always been a bit of how do you determine them with the building regulations? Do you class them as flats or do you class them as other residential? And then obviously whichever route you go down, you have a different set of fire safety measures. So yeah, I think the thing about student accommodation is it depends on the building, doesn't it, and the strategy that's adopted, and it's quite grey. Well, you can go down either route, but whichever route you go down, you have to then put the right fire safety measures in for the type of building it is and this evacuation strategy you've got.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, isn't it? I know we work with a lot of developers who work on student accommodation, and there's a lot of conversation at the moment around kind of second stairwells and whether they are needed, whether they are already when they're going to be mandated, and trying to get ahead of the game a little bit in getting those second stairwells.
We've dealt with lots of from a building perspective. Fire safety consultants argue both ways. They sometimes argue, well, these are like flats. We're going to design them like flats and put all the fire safety measures in as if they were flats. Others argue, well, no, we're going to put 2 stairs in and have an L1 fire alarm and a managed building and get everybody out. And I think equal strategies, but no, either strategy is okay, but as long as it's properly documented and, like I say, with this golden thread information, the person managing it understands what they've got and how they can manage it.
Now I'll go over to James. We've had a question that's come in from an Alex, who's a building surveyor who's watching today. Thank you for tuning in, Alex. When working on high-risk buildings for which any design work is excluded from surveyor's insurance, who is currently qualified to assist with designing elements such as cladding and compartment details for those buildings? Sounds like there's a very specific situation there that Alex has found himself in that he'd like some sort of answer to. So if James is directed at you, but if anyone can jump in with an answer, I'm sure Alex will be very appreciative.
Well, I understand that a number of designers have got limitations on their insurances and whatnot for that. So I've certainly been made aware of architects that aren't insured to do those sorts of things. So that's where you'd be looking to have your fire engineers involved. Fire engineers that specifically are insured to provide designs on those buildings.
Well, that's interesting. Alex has caveated that question by saying that trying to discharge the liability onto a fire engineer is proving to be difficult. So it seems that there's not necessarily going as smoothly as possible.
Well, there are limitations on the insurances of fire engineers as well. So it's not just go to a fire engineer. It has to be one that has the relevant insurances in place, certainly.
Yeah, these fires could have competency, but not necessarily the insurance to give the advice. That's the big problem at the moment.
And also, I think it goes back to something that Pete said as well about products being actually tested and available for it, and trying to actually get that right product and the right information there to be able to give advice is very, very difficult. But I say it's then, is it for the fire engineer to actually design the cladding for the building?
I was just going to say a similar thing. We're finding that particularly detailing, if a product's tested, it's tested in a certain way, and that doesn't necessarily suit the form of the building, the format of the building. And the best starting point, obviously, is to construct in accordance with the tested details, but occasionally that doesn't work, and then you do need to find a fire engineer in practice or somebody who can actually review those details and make sure they're appropriate to the particular situation, which isn't an easy thing to do, and equally it's not easy to find somebody who's got the competence to be able to do that.
I think certainly from my perspective, I've looked at a number of these issues on developments I'm doing at the moment, and it's all about clarity. I think if you're just asked a question, I'd like to offload some liability onto a certain consultancy, they'll go, well, hang on a second, what liability are you trying to upload? And it's all a bit scary. I think people are absolutely clear about exactly what they want to doing, and they build it up in stages. And as Stephen said, you've got the right sort of products, and you're specifying the right products then, and you're finding the right people who can do the design. It's all achievable, but it's being absolutely clear about how you're going to go about it and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd agree with that, and I think you've got to put together teams that will address the concerns and build that picture as you go along. Use your product manufacturers, use their tested details, put together product families that are exactly in accordance with those, and ask your fire engineer to endorse them. But I think that's the way forward, and with the obligations on principal designers as a duty holder, which again isn't clear, but someone's going to have to pick it up on jobs we're tendering now, which will be built and then go through the registration process. It's a very difficult situation to operate in, because you ultimately want the principal designer to take that liability and have that responsibility, which I don't think they will shy away from, but they just like to know what they're signing up for. So we're in this bit of limbo period at the moment, as you know, we've spoken to some big architectural practices, and they're quite willing to take on the principal designer role, but they'll just say, I can't confirm it's insured, because at the moment it isn't explicit what liability I'm taking on, what insurance I'm buying to cover that risk. So yeah, it's in a bit of it's the one which Alex has written a plaster off there to open that one up. So.
Yeah, hopefully that's answered your question there, Alex. There's obviously a lot of moving parts with this, so we'll see how that goes for you, and best of luck with it. So Andrew, obviously there's a lot of focus on the fire regs at the moment around buildings larger than 18 meters. Are we anticipating that these will then eventually start to trickle down, these regulations, to those buildings smaller, more towards that 11 meter kind of level?
Yes, I think that we're going to see over the next few years that we've already seen that various bits and pieces have been pushed on to or applied to 11 meter high buildings.
Yeah.
And I think we'll find that more and more will be added to that, and the height restrictions will probably also get lower as well for it, and other building types being brought into what's known as in-scope buildings for it. But I think it's all about making sure that we do design, construct and deliver fire safe buildings for it.
Absolutely, I think that's the goal for everybody, isn't it? So we'll go to Pete for this one. The new controls on those new legal controls on non-compliance within the Building Safety Act, how stringent are they?
They're as stringent as everything else has been made. I mean, the whole idea is to really give some structure, I think, to all these building safety issues, but to give them some teeth, so people aren't sort of half doing what they're supposed to be told. They are actually all complying with it, and everybody across the piece is being made accountable for making sure that buildings are safe and funding remediation measures, which is a big issue if you're a house owner or leaseholder in one of these large apartments, because you've had terrible problems with house devaluations over the last few years.
I think historically, like I mean, we all worked at sort of local authority years ago, and like you say, very little enforcement action took place. And if you did manage to take enforcement action, the fines and penalties were almost non-existent really. It was just embarrassing. And so, like you say, they've introduced this because obviously it's given some very importance to the new legislation. And yeah, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you'll get prosecuted and you could end up in jail. So
there's criminal sanctions, and also there's a specific part of the legislation that refers to corporate bodies. So you can't say, oh well, this individual didn't do it, too bad. The actual businesses that employ these sorts of people and are responsible for making sure that buildings are safe are also held accountable too, as well as the directors who operate.
Exactly, yeah.
It seems the regulator are taking this quite seriously too. There've been a whole host of advertisers, certain jobs, particularly for that function: enforcement, evidence gathering, and making sure that ultimately people do what they're responsible for, not just for buildings being constructed, I would imagine, but for those who are going to have to be registered when they're occupied. So
yeah, and I can imagine at the start there'll be some sort of highly publicised prosecutions of people. So yeah, make sure if you manage buildings, and yeah, make sure you're doing the right thing and getting everything in place now, because they'll be looking to sort of put someone on a pedestal and prosecute them, no doubt, to sort of reinforce the message of the new regulations.
I mean, there's no doubt that obviously the strong push from people like Michael Gove is to make sure that everyone's responsible and everyone does it exactly as they're supposed to be doing, to keeping buildings safe. You know, the approach has been quite draconian compared to what he's going to do in terms of getting developers to go and manage all the properties that they've had involvements with over a long period. So I think Stuart's quite right. I think people will be made examples of it, certainly at the start, to reinforce the need to make sure that people actually do what they're told.
Brilliant, good stuff. We've probably got time for one more question, so we'll push this towards you, Ed. But feel free for anybody to jump in and add their expertise. So, timber frame buildings are something that's been talked about quite a lot, and the effect of these fire regs on timber frame buildings. Are there any special sort of measures that you're aware of for timber structures, and any potential limitations, therefore, that might put off whether it's property owners or developers resulting from the changes?
Timber frame is an interesting topic, and we've got a fire requirements policy that's been drawn with our insurers, which covers all our buildings, but we have limited exceptions within it. So if we have a single dwelling or a dwelling with a single front door, then we can still consider a timber frame for that. If we've got multiple dwellings behind a door with more front doors, to keep it as simple as possible, then we wouldn't consider timber frame to be appropriate in that way. That's the view our company and our insurers have guided us towards. So yeah, I'll get other people's opinion on that, but I think, yeah, it does have ramifications for the timber frame industry, and we need to be careful where we use them. We continue to use glulam timber, and we continue to use other sort of CLT cross-laminated timber panel systems, but again, they're all on very low risk, low rise, no sleep risk type buildings. So yeah, again, the careful selection of appropriate construction materials and typology is really key to those going forward with our insurers, our customers' insurers, and obviously the long-term sort of statutory bodies as well.
I'd echo that as well. For building regulations, they're effectively banned for anything that's more than 18 metres and or 7 stories, because in scope buildings now, when they're residential. And even within the guidance for other buildings, there is a comment under B4 that says you have to consider the external wall construction and provide something that's appropriate. So even for buildings that aren't in scope, there still needs to be a review of whether it's appropriate to use a timber frame or anything that's combustible in the external wall construction for that type of building, given the specific risks that relate to it. So it's timber frame is under a bit of scrutiny at the moment.
Excellent. Well, this is like a really good place to wrap it up. Thank you very much today for everybody that's attended this version and the previous edition of the webinar that we had. In total, we've had more than 400 people tune in. So obviously a topic that is widely affecting a lot of people across the built environment. So thank you to Andrew, to Steve, to Stuart, Colin, James, Ed, Pete, and also Lauren, who joined us for the previous edition of the webinar. And also thank you to Procon for helping support and promote this webinar. Procon in Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire, an excellent organisation. If you are involved in the built environment, worth getting involved with those and checking them out. So to finish off and to wrap up for us, I'll pass you over to Andrew Wignall.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. You've took the words out of my mouth as usual. So yeah, I'd like to thank all of the panel members and everybody that's joined us today for these seminars. We can't do it without you. It's a great way of talking to the industry, getting everybody's opinions and thoughts there. So once again, thank everybody and have an enjoyable afternoon.